Hi, I'm Mina Malik Hussain and you're watching The Coffee Table, and today we're having a fabulous conversation, and I know I say this every time, but it's always true, about art and culture in Pakistan and the amazing work that we're doing to preserve our culture and arts traditions and going forward to the future, and how it's such a civilizing influence on all of us, and everybody should be interested in doing this more and more each day, in schools, outside of schools, everywhere. As you can tell, I've already had a lot of coffee. So we're welcoming on set today Talha, Khushvaha, who is the Executive Director of the National Institute of Folk and Traditional Heritage, which we familiarly know as Virsa, and Shoaib Iqbal, who is the founder of The Little Art. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the set on this white sofa that I'm very fond of, my semicircle of truths. Well, we're going to sort of begin at the beginning, as it were. So, Talha, tell me, what does the Virsa do?
Well, as you just said, it's responsible for documenting and carrying out research about all the intangible and tangible heritage, and and then also promote and project it, and also basically try and link that with the identity of Pakistan. So it's a very serious thing, actually, which is.
So it's sort of a three-pronged approach. So there's preservation, there's documentation, and then there's promotion.
Yes.
So what falls under preservation of sort of cultural things? Because I know that there's a heritage museum, for example.
Yeah.
And then what goes on there?
No, there's heritage museum, yes, but there also, for example, heritage is cuisine, it's costumes, it's languages. I think all that we have, I think we need to, sometimes it's not even known what exactly is there. So sometimes we need to go out and send teams, find out, and then document that, which is really, really important. And so we have a record of everything that we have in terms of heritage.
Okay, and I think that's also probably doubly important because it becomes an academic resource as well. So if anybody wanted to work on it, and is there sort of, I'm assuming that the documentation includes, data as well about, practices and where it's being done and who is doing it.
History and everything.
And then, of course, promotion, which is sort of fairly obvious. Now, I'm glad that you brought up the idea of culture being tangible and intangible. So what's the difference?
Well, tangible is, of course, that we see. So that's not really too difficult. Okay. But intangible is what kind of meaning we associate with it, all the thoughts and expressions and the theory, and how we interpret it, what does it mean for us. All that actually linked to it is intangible. And,
I would sort of cycle back to this in just 1 minute. So Shoaib, tell me about The Little Art. It's a very sweet name, which is, just the beginning of all the wonderful things that it does.
Yes, I think this, in a simple way, which helps us to understand what we do, we say we work with children and young people through arts. And what essentially means that we see that arts offer a huge playground and space for children and young people to express themselves. Yes. Which is, I mean, when you look around, there are not many ways that they possibly can do, whether that's the conventional education system or the way it works, or any other avenues where children can go and express themselves. And we thought that this is something which is completely missing when we started about 12 years ago. So film, visual arts, performing arts, and all other related forms are the forms that we work with.
Okay. So what was the sort of motivation to set up The Little Arts? Because, a lot of schools do have like art lesson, but that's obviously not enough.
I think our idea was that it's not one corner activity that children or young people would do and then forget about it and do more important things, as you can interpret whatever those are. So we said it has to be central to the way we enjoy our time. For example, it has to be central to the way we try to think in terms of having an experience with our peers or teachers and family. So what do you do after school? You possibly go to a restaurant, you go to a park, which is very, very rare, or there are very few, you go to a mall, But these are experiences which are possibly not, I mean, they might be entertaining, but they are not intellectually enriching children.
Yes, this is true.
So we said, when we say arts, it means this has to be offering an experience which is enriching, intellectually important, and entertaining, of course. So this is how we see that we exist in a space which is about making meaningful connections with peers, with your friends, with the family, and eventually a society that is built around this.
But I think that's really crucial to the work that both of you are doing, and the idea that art, like you said, is not just one little corner of what you do or sort of like a side hobby, but it's actually a gateway to a kind of mindfulness and a kind of different way of seeing things. And it's almost sort of like, it sounds like it's encouraging children to have this kind of different worldview or sort of way in which they approach their surroundings and their environment.
True, yeah. It's essentially true because when we were relatively young, we would...
Some would argue we are still young.
Yeah.
That's why I said relative.
We would go out and say, I would like to produce a play, and then it would be very difficult to make people support that. For example, if you go to a company and say, I would like to produce a play, possibly that marketing manager has no idea what you're talking about. If you're talking about sports, they have an idea because they have an experience of it.
Yes.
So, and this was the reason we said, there's the cultural capital in our society is really, really, minimum or small. And we said, this is something, if people would understand the value of art, they possibly will be supporting it.
Yes,
it doesn't mean they have to
absolutely.
work in the art sector, even if they are, bankers or technology professionals.
Yes.
They'll be thinking the value of it, which is connected with imagination and leadership and so many other things. So this is why we said we would like to work with children and young people, creating memories that they have, when they were 8-year-old, they went to an art gallery. When they were 13-year-old, they made a film and which was screened in a cinema. When they were 15-year-old, they went to Italy and represented Pakistan in this festival. So all of these things actually adds to the whole idea that it is, practicing art is not an isolated exercise anymore. It is very much part of our life, and a life that becomes more enriched because of these experiences. So we are not supporting that artistic activity as an activity and then do something else which is important. We are saying this is the way you look at life and interact with it.
And that's really crucial also, not so that you can sort of have an artistic approach or a culturally sensitive, and not in quotes, but a culturally aware approach to life, but also, like you said, we have a perfectly mainstream job and carry on with things, but just be able to have a sort of sense of cultural identity as well. And I don't know, do you think that there's a sort of attention there? Because it seems like when we talk about culture, it's like, oh, we're a very rich area and we're very proud of our culture. But then, like Shoaib said, we hardly have cultural capital that is kind of tangible, that we can kind of see or support at least. That's a weird problem?
Yes, I think one of the problems we are struggling with is how to reach out to children, what Shoaib is already doing, but we want to connect children to heritage. Because for a lot of elderly people, I think, yes, they have spent a lot of time doing whatever in their lives, but I think children are a real concern, and it should be a real concern. Identity, I think we have a bit of a problem, to say the least. And I think with identity or the lack of it, usually you have lower self-esteem, then you don't have confidence, and then you get complexed. And if you have a complex, then you have a very, very narrow way of looking at things, and only the powerful things then you can relate to. And so anything foreign or anything that comes in is then something that you want to do without actually exploring everything that you have. So in terms of your 10,000 years of heritage, I think we talk about it fashionably because the world talks about it, and it'd be completely out of step with fashion if you were to say that, oh, identity and culture and heritage is not important. So obviously we don't say that, but we don't actually believe in it. That's my feeling. Generally, as
Like, do you think that's more of like sort of liking the idea of being cultural, but not actually doing anything to support a cultural life?
Because that's the in thing. But the culture that we then are confronted with is not as glamorous. The identity is something that we rather not have. So it's starting from our land and then going up the passport, and then everything comes with it. And I think we're not, because we don't relate to it as our own. That's why you have all these upper class clubs in Pakistan not encouraging regional cultural dresses. So you have a very, very strange kind of code. It's a very exclusion is the way they carry on things.
Which is sort of undeniably part of our very particular colonial history as well, and we've sort of inherited a lot of.
And even that is distorted. For example,
well.
during the British times, no one could have a problem with turban because they had alliances with all these Indian kings.
Okay.
But the Babus now have a problem with this turban because they are, it's like being more loyal than the king.
No, it is true, and you have to be laughing about it, but you're right. Yeah.
And I've obviously lived this, so I know that there's not too much of glamour and respect attached to our own identity and culture, and I think that's a problem. So we relate to other people. For example, if someone is wearing a kilt, it's a very cultural thing.
Oh, yeah.
If someone wears a dhoti, how can you possibly have dhoti in a civilized world? I mean, that's how most people would probably approach it.
I think that's true, and we're going to take a very quick break and come back to this because this aspect of the conversation deserves a whole segment. So we'll see you in 1 minute. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back to the coffee table. We're having a really interesting conversation about culture and the sort of pros and cons of owning it. I can't believe that there are any cons of owning your culture. It's just not possible. But Talha, why do you think we are so iffy about being more confident about owning who we are culturally? Do you think that it's probably maybe because Pakistan is so diverse and we have so many different kinds of cultures and subcultures and lots of people with lots of different practices, and we're also, I think, fundamentally very nervous about the idea that unity should mean that everyone is the same?
I think that is a problem, which really is the beginning of the problem. Because if you were to say that we should deny all other, I usually take identity as building blocks.
Right.
So, for example, I could be from a school, I could be from a village, I could also be from a city, then I could be from NCA, I could be from Virsa.
Yes.
All
those things are true.
All those things come together, should come together.
Yes.
To give me my identity and my faith and all those things. And the fact that, this kind of music or all those things. But the problem is that the narrative has been that you must deny all your identities because the fear was that will in some way hamper the unity of the whole country. I feel it is the opposite. The more exposure you have to diversity, the more, for example, we know about all the 6 regions of the country. And the more we meet those people, the more respect we give. So it's sort of it's like you can't respect someone who's polishing a shoe unless you do it yourself. And then you respect what he is doing. Similarly, I think with cultures also, with art, with everything, unless you are exposed to it, and unless you have questioned and then given an answer, which may not be just one answer, it can be many answers. But unless you've engaged with that, and if you keep denying everything else, then it could be like George Bush is from Texas and he's also an American.
Yes.
And there's no contradiction there. But for us, there's a problem, because I think the whole narrative, I feel that there is a problem with that. You have to be a Sindhi or a Punjabi to be a Pakistani. But if you approach it from an enlightened awareness perspective, then you will respect other cultures. That's what I've noticed. And that's what the theory also says, by the way.
There is theory, there's data to back that up. I'm almost talking about theory because it's sort of like, it's not just me who's saying this. But there's also something very important about participation as well. And it's not, do you think that, with projects like the stuff that Little Art does, and other, sort of things that are happening in Pakistan. Do you feel that participation in any kind of sort of creative endeavor does help foster this sense that everybody can have different opinions and different ways of approaching things? But ultimately, it doesn't mean that you have to fight about it. There's no disunity in doing that. So do you think that participation, is what I'm trying to say, helps foster that?
I think there's a one step before that. Even as an artist or as a writer, or if you're doing an artistic activity, it means you are kind of questioning the way you are thinking about certain ideas yourself first. You're not just expressing it, you're kind of reviewing it. If you're writing a prose, and every word that you put in there, you're constantly thinking what it means. Can it be there is another word? And the whole idea of construct around identity is also very polarized. And I see it in a way because either I think that whatever I believe is absolute reality and truth, which means whatever you believe is wrong or false. So this whole, and this is how, we kind of start also define fundamentalism and then just imposing your own thoughts to other people. So, the way artistic activity is naturally happens is that you're continuously questioning, and which means there is no absolute reality. Either you like a painting or you don't like it, but there is no right or wrong, and you might have so what we have seen in terms of this nature of art, that it already questioned the way you might think right or wrong in terms of identity. And as Talha said, and I think it actually helps you to go away from the idea that you also, when you are right, other person has to be wrong.
Has to be wrong. Otherwise, then you would feel really insecure about what you think. And then sort of questioning is something that makes us terribly nervous. And it's also, I think, something that our schooling is also part of this problem, and also a bit of our culture, where I don't think that classrooms are places where children are encouraged to ask questions. And to sort of be critical. And culturally, we're very nervous about critical also, because we think that it's just being rude to be like, well, I don't think so, or I don't agree. And that's also very much part of a creative sort of expression and trying to have these conversations.
Yeah, and I think, so as a second step, when you create something, which means, okay, fine, this is your reality, this is how you want to look at things, or as your opinion, and then it goes public, and then people are looking at it, and people are saying, this is how it could be, and you're in a continuous dialogue with that art form. You make a film, and then the film is in the cinema or showcased in your classroom, which means other people are talking about it. So I think, which means you are allowing yourself and your opinion and thoughts to be fragile, and say, I'm inviting you to change that. And this
which is
how,
also scary.
Because, and you have to be bold enough to do that. So we think that when you're working with children and young people through art, you are possibly not directly helping them to develop an identity as the way we understand as adults or from academic perspective, but you're allowing them to be wrong sometimes. You're allowing them to be making mistakes, and this is how you continuously improve as human being.
That's what growth is. And then I think that then, by extension, whatever sense of self that they do begin to develop will be one that's kind of based in something that they have thought about and that they really believe, and probably will be more flexible also, and kind of open to all sorts of difference as well. That sounds so hopeful.
And last bit in that is that because the nature of working in this space through art and with the values that are in our culture and heritage, you are saying that make mistakes because this is how you're going to grow. You're not saying if you make a mistake, then we are going to judge you and we are going to send
you. Exactly.
So this is kind of exactly the opposite the way our conventional things that we train children to works.
There's another, I think, related concept, which is that when you know that there are several solutions or versions or truths or variations or versions of the same thing, then you're also, if you're connected with your own heritage and identity, then you'd be able to then identify what is more relevant in your cultural context. So I think that also gives them that, by doing art and culture linked to it, they would also be able to then know that not everything that comes from the West is necessarily the perfect thing for our cultural context. Yes. And it can be perfectly good for the West. So I think that will also teach them respect for all the other cultures, including the Western or European cultures, and also respect themselves, which I think is the real idea.
And it also, I think, really neatly answers this anxiety also about how a lot of people say that this is not in our culture and this is a Western idea, and that, you know, people are susceptible to these Western ideas. But if you, like you said, were very sort of, you knew who you were and you knew what your cultural sort of imperatives were, then you'd be sort of less swayed.
Yes, and
by other people's
I also feel
ideas.
that heritage at some point also becomes, you know, it's universal. We need to learn from the Europeans, whatever they have learned now, advanced in. And we also need to know who we are, and we need to also learn from our own heritage. So 10,000 years of wisdom cannot or should not just go to waste. This is like, you know, you have a whole octaves and the whole piano in front of you, and you're just playing 2 notes.
Yeah.
That's not going to be as nice as you have the whole repertoire of the entire set of
Absolutely, and a sort of sense of there's something missing here, but I just don't know how to pinpoint what that particular thing is. So, Talha, is there a difference between creative expression and cultural activity?
No, I think they're quite linked. Of course, they're different in a manner that sometimes you're doing cultural things that can be also repetitive. So you're not being too creative sometimes.
Right.
But I think creativity flows from culture and heritage. I think the right kind of creativity, and I say that because, for example, if you have just watched, you know, there's this, you know, if you've just watched, for example, Beauty and the Beast and Cinderella.
Yeah.
So all your stories, writing, all your dramas and all your plays will revolve around that. But if you explored everything there is to explore that you can possibly explore in terms of even your own, whatever stories we have here, and then obviously also exposure to the other foreign ideas, then I think you will be able to really, really come up with something which is more relevant to your own cultural context.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not out of date and out of step with the modern world, which is really the idea. I mean, we should be able to prepare our children that they're anchored very strongly in their own identity and heritage, and yet be global citizens.
Yes, absolutely. And do you think that one sort of factor in this is also that when we think about our own culture, and often we think of it as folk art, that, you know, sort of ethnic, but it's always seen as kind of a low form of culture.
Yes.
You know, sort of ethnic things, like you said, like a dhoti, for example, isn't really seen as a sophisticated or as something.
Even languages.
Yes.
I mean, the intangible part. I mean, look at, for example, most children in these so-called very, very upper class and high quality schools would be discouraged from speaking any other language but English.
Oh yes, absolutely. I think I think back in the day you would get a fine for speaking Urdu in break.
Yes. So exactly.
You know,
I mean,
you're like, well,
it says a lot about our mindset.
But a lot of parents are also perfectly happy for this to be so, because a lot of parents don't speak to their children at home in their regional or mother tongues.
Because as I said, if your identity is slightly distorted, or let's say you don't relate to it, then there's low self-esteem, low confidence, and complex. And once you have complex, you will want to disassociate yourself from all that you had. So it's, for example, it's not just language, it's not just dhoti, it's not just a turban, it's everything. And I think the end point is that we also sometimes say, oh, we don't practice anything, so we're not practicing religion, we're not practicing culture, we're very modern. So our modern is...
As if modernity is divorced from all things that make you a thinking, feeling person.
Exactly.
Even with architecture, like I find it very sort of strange that we are now building houses that have no provisions for the heat, for example, like a veranda and a roshandan are extremely useful.
Because there's no awareness.
Cultural artifacts.
Because there's no awareness, because, it's like I want to do, I make a veranda only if the White House has it. So it's like the architecture is not, heritage is also very scientific. And I think that is what I will try and promote also from Virsa platform. That we should not just approach heritage as just as I was talking to Shoaib about it, an white dead elephant, where you have to drag it because, there's ticket on it. And so you make some money with tourism. So that's why you keep dragging that elephant. No. Heritage has 10,000, for example, years of scientific developments and evolution. Now, this turban, for example, is a flask, is a thermos flask. So it's equally effective in summers as in winter.
Oh, okay. For a second, I was like, what? There's a flask in there? No, but what you mean is it keeps you cool in the summer.
Like very scientific, because it had like 9 layers of air trapped inside. It like insulates the head from outer extreme temperature. And architecture, for example, again, is the same problem that we have now, this glass box architecture, which is obviously not as pleasing to the eye, to say the least.
Yes.
But it has no provision to handle the climate.
Yes, absolutely.
So you have, it's like a microwave, where if the AC is not working for a second, you will die because there's so much of heat. And then if the AC is working, you will die of the bill, which, a heart attack.
Yes, you will. Instant death.
So that's why heritage, I think, it affects us by disconnecting from our heritage and culture and roots. We are actually suffering in our present. That's what we need to really understand.
And we really don't want that suffering to sort of now trickle down into the future, which is where our kids are so important. We're going to take a very quick break and come back. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back to the coffee table. We're having a wonderful conversation with Shoaib Iqbal and Talha Khushvaha about Pakistan and culture. It's really fun. So Shoaib, tell me, with your work with students and schools and things, have you sort of faced resistance from institutions or parents or just people who feel like, is this really necessary? What is this? Sort of art, culture, this idea that it's something nice, but you shouldn't spend too much time on it because you should be doing maths instead.
I think we kind of calculated that when we started, and we were also fearful. But why we need to kind of be fearful about experimenting with it when it offers an amazing space to feel free and work so naturally, which means the art itself, any form, was a kind of a power for us to take it to children and engage children with it. And always we believed that whether it was a film festival from where we started, we said if the art is strong that we are presenting, it will affect people, and any kind of challenge that comes with it, possibly will subsides or dies down because people might not have an idea what it is really. If you haven't actually read good poetry, you will consider reading books as a waste of time. But if you have read a good book and you see something reading a book, you'll say, you'll have will not stop them reading books.
Yeah.
It's the same way. The art has to be powerful and central to the whole conversation. So we always also kind of refrain away from educating children.
Because that kind of sounds prescriptive, that you should be doing this is something you care, that you must be doing.
Yeah. Even though our, line that after celebrating 10 years, which was 2 years ago, we started to actually say that we celebrate education. Celebrating education is something we do, but we do it in a way that it doesn't mean that we need to essentially teach children and then assess it in a way that how we think they should be able to progress, which means we need to actually engage children, give them exposure. If they are enjoying it, which means they are enjoying learning, which means they themselves will reach somewhere. I don't need to be worried about it. So
Yes.
it's the same way, experiences works for us as adults as well.
Yes.
So if we take an example from our film festival.
Which is now in its 12th year?
Yes, this is the 12th year we are producing. Last year it was 11th, and we did the events in 6 cities across Pakistan, from Lahore, Karachi, Faisalabad, Gujranwala, even relatively smaller cities like South Punjab and Bakkar and Jamshoro.
Wow. So the film festival, what kind of films do you show in the festival?
So these are the films made for and by children. And we bring films from all over the world, select some of the best, and then put it in the program, which are culturally appropriate and will have some value if children sees that. But essentially, these are the films which children will enjoy watching.
Yes.
Because that's one. And then these films also has a strong aesthetic value, whether that's the way they are done, whether that's the quality of the animation or the music or one way or the other, anything. We don't really worry about the messages because any content which is good as an art experience, it has a message which might not come across as a moral of the story at the end, but it will stay with you like a good poem or a good memory.
Yes. So, and that's important, I think, that the moral aspect of it also, that not every story and not every piece of art has a moral to it, but it will have meaning and it'll say something to you that is important, and that whatever you take away from it is important.
Sure.
And one really, I think, important aspect of the work that the Little Art does is also that you guys work hard to include children from marginalized communities and from lower income households as well. Because, art should be for everybody, isn't it?
Yes. Essentially, the film festival, because Little Art is a non-profit organization, and we said we are not going to be completely a commercial venture in any way. So the film festival brings children and young people from relatively smaller schools, even if they are in bigger cities. And then we support them to attend the festival as audience. We also have a competition, which is a national competition of under 18 young people making films. Every year there's about 100 films comes to us.
Oh, wow.
And then we are also working in 15 schools where we are training children. And these schools are schools which might not have resources which you need to produce films. We also do teachers training and engage children directly and train them to make films. And these films are screened in the festival. So there's a presentation as filmmakers.
There's a sort of cycle where you can make art and then also be able to show your art, because that's also important.
Yeah.
As a sort of creating like an ecosystem, if you will, of creative expression. And Talha, is there such a thing as an ecosystem of culture? Because culture is a sort of dynamic thing, there's a fluidity to it. We keep changing, it keeps evolving.
I think, yes, there is, because, there can be, because it's constantly changing and evolving. You could actually have a few things introduced into it, which may not be very organic as far as the evolution is concerned.
Right.
And then that would perhaps not fit in as well in the beginning, and it will probably create some shocks. And then ultimately things do settle down, because culture is very dynamic, it's very flexible, it's changing constantly. But I think, yes, some sort of direction is sometimes needed. So that it remains in the context.
Right. So what is sort of Lok Virsa doing to kind of shape that narrative a little bit?
First of all, from my own experience, I was sometimes feeling slightly snobbish about shoe polishing, for example.
Yeah.
And so my mamu, I remember, sat me down and he said, "Let me teach you the art of water polishing the shoe."
Yeah.
And that 1 hour that I spent, I got really tired. But ever since that time, I now respect a boy or anyone polishing that and working hard.
Yeah.
So I think what we would want to ideally do with Lok Virsa, working with the people responsible for education, that young children are exposed to art and craft making, all those experiences where they're, for example, trying to play instrument, a musical instrument, they're also carving stone, things like that. So we could have summer camps, for example, for people, because Lok Virsa is where the folk heritage also comes.
Yes.
And I think if children can do that, they will never be able to disrespect or undermine that. Ever since I started playing the instrument, for me, an instrumentalist is like a wizard. It's very impressive.
Yes.
But if you don't know, so I think the idea is for us to teach the children, expose them actually, not teach, but expose them so that they can organically grow with that exposure. And I think education should have an element where, respected sir, I beg to state that I'm suffering from fever. We got to out of that.
Yours humbly, yours humble servant.
So they're doing art. They're also doing their history properly, their heritage, and there are lots of things we know that we have that. For example, the decimal system, it came from this region, where, and then it went to the Arabs, exactly, and then from the Arabs it went to Europe. So the Arabic numerals are actually the Indian subcontinent numerals. If we can teach our children
responsible for torturing students since eternity.
But so scientific, artistic, everything, I think, needs to come along.
And I think it's not enough to sort of rest on our laurels as well, because there's also this idea that, well, we come from a culture where we did so many wonderful things in the past. Yeah. It's not enough to just kind of be proud of that, but we have to sort of look to practices that we can adopt now.
I think we can't disconnect the two. You see, the problem is that we need to find out, because I think there's very low self-esteem.
Yeah.
Generally, people have this impression that there used to be caves here 500 years back. I mean, generally, that's the idea. Although it doesn't seem very plausible. The feeling that we have from our own, or how we feel about it, is that, yes, we were not too sophisticated. And people then say that it is because you are losers, you're trying to glorify the history. But even that history is not well known. We stop sometimes just getting to know about kings. Yes. So there's no literary or artistic history, or what crafts and what kind of spirituality was here, how the whole thing was developed, and how even you had these philosophers, for example, in Taxila, that I came across when my friend Salman Rashid told me about it. He's a very passionate man.
He's lovely. And he's been on the show.
Yeah. So he actually, I was introduced to the fact that the Greeks were overwhelmed by the level of, the philosophy and philosophical development in this part of the region. Now, why can't we build on that? Because first of all, we need to have that self-esteem and confidence that, yes, we have been doing great things in the past.
Yes.
And so there is hope that we can even do that in the future. And that means not just our own heritage, but also modern knowledge all over the world. We need to acquire. We need to be updated. So up to date, modern knowledge, but deeply embedded in heritage. I think that's the way forward.
Because if we ignore this, then it does sound to me like there's a cost to it.
Yes.
There's a social cost, and there's even possibly an economic cost.
There is.
To this divorce between our lives and our reality and the culture that we have inherited, whether we like it or not.
See, it's the diet. So you don't have the right diet, you'll feel hotter. Then not the right dress. So if you wear a double-breasted waistcoat in June, 30th of June, and I'm sure a lot of our own organizations have not been able to work out the appropriate dress for the climate and our culture for almost 70 years now.
Yes.
And then, of course, architecture. So the dress, the cuisine, the architecture, all that was developed in the climate and the geographical context also, not just the worldview, but also so the faith, the belief. Now, for example, the architecture with the lawn in front of the house, that might be a very good idea in Europe, where there's not too much of privacy concern, maybe at that time. But with our women and the culture, how it is, that's how you see, people flying with plates if they're having breakfast on a Sunday morning and you have guests coming in. They just, they don't know how, they just run in because they're not dressed up. So the inner courtyard and the lawn, which was like surrounded by the house.
A private space.
A private space was, I think, more in context, more in cultural context, our cultural context, than these modern designs. But we just keep mindlessly doing it because we're not aware of it.
So we're missing out on the value or things that we can learn from cultural introspection as well, and sort of a return to those roots, and maybe in an adapted way, because of course our realities have changed, and like we said, Sid, culture keeps evolving. So that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily give up, your broccoli, for example, and just eat local, but there needs to be a way that we can kind of keep the past with us.
Now, if
and become modern.
If your architecture, for example, has those elements which are climatically suitable and culturally suitable, then you can have the most modern energy-efficient systems.
Yes.
You can have Bang & Olufsen installed all over the house. I mean, who's
This is
stopping
when
you?
your musicians on the show, right? Like, the speakers are the best ones.
So, I mean, I'm just saying that technology, everything can come in. And anything that is, for example, if you want to install those solar windows now, the glass, which is also a solar panel, why not?
Yeah.
So that's like combining, but you must still make your house efficient in terms of the energy and avoiding heat and build up inside. So why can't we combine the two?
Exactly. Like so we can have the best of both worlds. And I think it's also really interesting because we come from such a culturally diverse part of the world also, that owning all of these things is hardly appropriation either. You know, there's this great sense, these days that, if you do something, if you take elements from other people's culture, then that's problematic and you shouldn't be doing that. But we have so much at our fingertips. That it's really not appropriation at all.
See, it'll only be inappropriate.
Treasures.
It'll only be inappropriate if by adopting such things, you're making your life more miserable.
Or being
naturally.
disrespectful.
Or disrespectful. Then there's a problem. But
there's
usually,
so much potential there. Thank you so much, both of you, for being on the show.
Thank you
very much. This is a very complex and very important conversation to have. And, good luck and thank you for all the excellent works you are doing. Thank you guys for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Please look up Lok Virsa, the PNCA, the Little Art. There's so much amazing work being done to help foster a deeper sense of cultural pride in all of us, that it would do well for us to think about that. Thanks for watching The Coffee Table, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.